Good day, brethren. How has your week been? Welcome to another session of our Sunday School lessons. Last week, we started on Lesson 2 and established that God defends His people. Today, we will also see how God has been in defense of the helpless, even when regarded as Gentiles. Remember our memory scripture? Deuteronomy chapter 10 from verse 17 to 18. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, a great God, mighty and awesome, who regards not persons nor takes reward. He executes justice for the fatherless and widow, and loves the stranger in giving him food and clothing. So we're discussing this division, titled Defends the Gentiles' Rights, under two sections. A. In the case of Hagar, the Egyptian, and B. In the case of the Gibeonites. Hagar was Sarai's maid. Sarai had no child for Abraham, and the couple were getting old. Sarah began to be desperate. She was losing her hope in God. In her desperation, she decided to use her maid Hagar to get what she wanted. Desperation makes us make foolish decisions. Abraham slept with Hagar as suggested by Sarah his wife, and Hagar became pregnant. Then the unexpected began to happen. Sarai became despised by her maid, and that got her really angry, and she became harsh. Hagar had to flee from her mistress, and Sarai became very hard on her. All along, the God of all flesh had watched. It was time He intervened. He found Hagar in the wilderness and asked her to return home and be subject to her mistress. He promised to take care of the unborn child. Hagar returned home and became submissive to her mistress, and there seemed to be some peace. 14 years later, God had favor on Sarah, and she conceived and bore her own child, Isaac. Soon, envy started rising again. This time, Sarah had to act, insisting that the slave child would not share in her child's inheritance. She called for the child and her mother to be expelled, and with God's agreement, Abraham expelled them. But God did not leave them. He protected the child and promised to make him a great nation. Ishmael went on to become a great nation, as God had promised. So God does not neglect anyone. He fights for the vulnerable and is the defender of the defenseless. B. In the case of the Gibeonites. According to the passage in 2 Samuel chapter 21, a famine had affected Israel for 3 consecutive years while David was king. Although David had been God's chosen king, his reign was not spared of famine. One good thing David chose to do was to consult God regarding the situation instead of approaching it by human reasoning. God responded, revealing that the famine was brought upon Israel because of a wrongdoing against the Gibeonites. And who were the Gibeonites? According to the passage, they were definitely not Israelites. They were first mentioned in John chapter 9, where they had cleverly lured Israel into a treaty with them. The leader of Israel, Joshua, at that time did not consult God before making this treaty, and they became bound by oath to never destroy the Gibeonites. In turn, the Gibeonites became woodcutters and water fetchers for the Israelite community. The leaders did not destroy them so that they would not face the curse attached to the oath. Years later, when Saul was king in Israel, he acted with unguided zeal. He defied the oath and murdered Gibeonites. The effect of his actions was a famine that bothered David. God had allowed the famine, even though the Gibeonites had been the ones cunning in making the treaty. God would honor His name. He punished Israel for the offense of Saul against the Gibeonites. David took steps to make amends, and God permitted his actions to appease the Gibeonites. After David had appeased the Gibeonites, the famine ended. God would rather honor His word and His name than be partial even against Gentiles. Our lesson: if God did not allow Gentiles to be cheated, even by His own people Israel, we should deal fairly with others, even those outside our faith community. God defends the defenseless and deals with cheats. Glory be to God. That wraps up lesson 2 of our Sunday school lessons for this season. May the Lord continue to be our defender. We'll meet next week for lesson 3. God bless you.